Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday on a Thursday. This is Marty Kaiser with our Friday Real Estate Tidbits. We're doing it on Thursday this week because tomorrow's July 4th and we'll be celebrating with our families. And while I'm talking about July 4th, please be safe, everyone. You always read about some firecracker tragedies every year, so please use utmost caution. Hopefully it'll rain a lot, so the fireworks timeline will be a little bit shorter this year. Seems like over the years we get fireworks for 3 or 4 days around this time of the year. And for pet owners like myself, it's a big nuisance because a lot of pets are petrified by this. You try to give them medicine to relax them or stress jackets. There's a lot of different things you can give pets now. But I would say universally, dogs pretty much do not like it. So it's a stressful time for the pets and the pet owners. But anyway, enough about July 4th. It's expected we're going to have a lot of rain over the next 3 or 4 days, so be prepared for that. Hope that doesn't disrupt people's travel plans. But in either event, have a safe and happy July 4th. As I mentioned last weekend, we started a new segment here where we're going to have a couple questions from listeners. So I'm going to turn it over to my producer and right-hand person, Shanna Gonzalez, to ask me a couple questions today.
Hello, Marty. We had a listener with the following question. How do real estate commissions work?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, I can't give a 15-second answer to that, so bear with me, listeners, because this will be a relatively detailed answer. Real estate commissions, the first thing I should say is they're 100% negotiable and should always be transparent. With the new real estate laws we had that came out in August of 2024, we have to follow some more specific guidelines. So without going into too much boring detail with you, typically you discuss commissions with your customer, and they can vary. They could be as high as 7%. They could probably be as low as 4%. And there may occasionally be a variation to that. Generally speaking, you're going to find that the ones on the really low end have some things they don't do. They may be limited service options. They may be less experienced agents, or they may have less marketing. But that's entirely up to you as the consumer when you're interviewing agents to, number one, find out what their fee is, and number two, find out what you're getting for that fee. So the way that commissions are divided up, so to speak, in most cases, you'll agree to pay your agent a certain commission. So let's just say for discussion purposes, it's 5%. And the agent explains to you that in a typical transaction, if there's another agent representing the buyer, you as the seller have the option of offering that agent a portion of the 5%. So if you choose to do that, typically with a lot of agents, they would split the commission, and that would be 2.5% to the buyer's agent and 2.5% that the listing agent retains. However, in theory and legally, you're not required to offer the buyer's agent compensation. So you could make an arrangement with your listing agent and not offer the buyer's agent a fee. Now, if you do that, then of course, if that buyer typically is going to look at your house and let's say they end up buying it, they're going to have to compensate their buyer's agent. And since historically buyers typically don't pay buyer's agents, that might significantly reduce your traffic on the house. But that's entirely up to you as the consumer, how you want to structure your commissions. One of the things that's a kind of a pet peeve of mine when it comes to commissions, and I'll share this recent experience I had with you, and frequently the consumer is not aware of this, and it's really a detrimental concept for the consumer. I represented a customer a couple weeks ago, and they purchased a house that was in the mid 450s, and I was the buyer's agent. Everything went smoothly. The deal closed right on time. Everybody was happy. So as part of the process now with the new real estate laws that took place in August, when I schedule viewing appointments on behalf of a buyer, one of the questions I ask the listing agent is, what's the compensation for the buyer's side if we submit an accepted contract? So on this particular transaction, the compensation was 2.5%. So that was not unusual, and that was fine. And like I said, we showed the house, we wrote a contract, we sold the house, everything went smoothly. When I verified what we call the ALTA, or the closing statement, the day before closing, to my surprise, my fee was 2.5%, and the listing agent's fee was 3.5%. So their consumer paid 6%, but they didn't split it equally. Is there anything illegal about that? Not at all. However, I would venture to say that possibly their seller or consumer was not aware that they were dividing it unequally. Had they known that, they may not have liked that, because why wouldn't they have liked that? Well, theoretically, they're paying 6% in that scenario. But maybe if they had offered the buyer's agents half of that, which in that situation would have been 3%, maybe they would have generated more activity and more multiple offers. Even though realtors aren't supposed to use commissions as a reason to show or not show houses, from a practical point of view, when you're in a commission business and you're making a higher fee on one thing versus another, human nature is going to dictate that a certain amount of real estate agents are going to look forward to the higher commission. But from the consumer's point of view, there was zero benefit in them paying the listing agent more than the buyer's agent made. So that was a surprise to me. So that's one of the reasons why when you're a potential seller, you should verify exactly what the commission split is so you're aware of it and approve it. Commissions are a very sensitive topic, so it's critical that these are properly explained to everybody involved. And obviously, paperwork is signed acknowledging what the commissions are, so there's no surprises. So that's how commissions are. Shanna, what's the next question you have from one of our audience members?
The final question, can you explain how accurate pre-approval letters are?
That's another great question. And I think a lot of people assume, and I'll spell that out, ASSUME, and there's an old saying of the first three letters of that name that you shouldn't assume things because they're not always correct. So what is a pre-approval letter, and how can they theoretically vary? Most people assume on the consumer side that if you have a pre-approval letter, that means that if that buyer buys your house, the deal's absolutely going to close. And unfortunately, that's not the case for a couple of reasons. Number one, pre-approval letters on most occasions are only a lender opinion based on the information that that lender has about the prospective purchaser. So they're not a guarantee in most cases. The reason that I say in most cases, you have a minority of lenders, when they issue a pre-approval letter, have actually gone through and done preliminary data collection and gotten an underwriting opinion. So that pre-approval letter is quite strong, and the likelihood it doesn't close is very minimal. But the average of pre-approval letter doesn't go to that degree. But why there's still a difference between lender A's pre-approval letter and lender B's pre-approval letter is sometimes some of the lenders will issue a pre-approval letter based on what the prospective buyer has verbally told them. Like they might say, okay, I make $100,000 a year, I have a 680 credit score, I've rented for 2 years and have great rental references, things of that nature. And I don't have a car payment, etc. So based on that information, based on the purchase price, based on how much of a down payment the buyer is telling the lender they're working with, they issue a pre-approval letter for a certain purchase amount and a certain mortgage amount. However, that information that customer shared with the lender may or may not be 100% accurate. So if it's not 100% accurate after it's verified, that pre-approval letter is going to vary, and it could vary significantly. On the flip side, there's other lenders that when they issue a pre-approval letter, they want some verification before they do that. So they pull the credit, and they may want to see year-to-date earnings or something that they can verify that income is more solid. So in that situation, that pre-approval letter would be more solid. So that's why, again, you have to ask these questions, and it's incumbent on your real estate agent that represents the sellers to do their due diligence. I know myself, and I've had this policy for many years now, when I get a pre-approval letter and it's accompanied with an offer, one of the first things I do is I call that lender, I introduce myself, I tell them why I'm calling, that we have an offer through one of their customers, and I'm reading their pre-approval letter. And I try to find out from them, A, what information have they actually verified? And B, do they feel comfortable with that buyer? In other words, is it a best case scenario pre-approval, or they say, no, this person's got strong credit, they've got a bunch of assets, I've worked with them previously. They give you information over and above the pre-approval letter to put you at ease, and you can have your seller, if they agree to the offer, to sign it with confidence that the probability of that deal closing is very high. There's never a 100% guarantee, but we want to make the percentage as close to that as possible. On the flip side, maybe that lender, I can tell, is either lazy or inexperienced, or they haven't asked for as much information as I would like. So the bottom line is I don't have a warm and fuzzy with them. So I tell my seller that, and I say, if it was my house and it was up to me, I'm going to require that buyer to talk with a lender that I trust, so that my lender can derive information from that buyer and give me an educated assessment of the buyer's ability to buy that house. And if my seller agrees, that's exactly what I tell the other agent. Now, if the other agent or the buyer refuses to talk to my lender and says they're not comfortable sharing their information with my lender, then I would advise my seller to move on from that buyer. Again, that's my seller's choice, but we don't want to waste everyone's time. We don't want to, of course, waste the seller's time and then have them plan to move and have the deal fall through. I don't want to waste my time. And believe it or not, I don't want to waste the buyer's time either, because they're going to get all excited, pay for inspections, appraisals, and then the deal could fall through. So I am very anal and strict about getting as much verification in advance as I can. So I hope that answered your question, Shanna, and we'll keep those questions coming in our next episode. Before I forget, Shanna is going away for travel next week, and so I've got a busy week scheduled, so we're going to postpone our podcast next week. So our next podcast will start a week from this coming Tuesday. It'll give you a week off from hearing my voice drone on, but I hope that answered everybody's questions. To give you a little bit of an update on some things going on, the real estate market, as I mentioned on Tuesday's podcast, seems to be getting a little busier. I've had a great week this week and wrote up a few new transactions. And so I always like when I'm doing that, and they seem like very solid transactions. And the buyers are thrilled, the sellers are thrilled. So those are the kind of transactions we like. The listing inventory is definitely staying at a healthy level. So it's putting a premium on competition and making sure that the sellers follow our recommendations. From the buyer's perspective, the buyers are having more selections. The things that I really try to impart on sellers in a more competitive market, and you've probably heard me say this a few times on these podcasts, but it reiterates repeating it, is that when you go to market, the house must be ready to show. In other words, it must be in as pristine condition as the seller's able to make it. We must price it properly, and we must provide reasonable access to prospective buyers. You know, everybody's situation as a seller is different. Some sellers don't like a lockbox, and obviously we have a little bit of additional challenges with that because then the seller's providing access, and then we have to explain the seller the do's and don'ts if they're providing access to a buyer. As realtors, we prefer lockboxes, but it's not always possible in all situations. So that's just one simple thing. The thing with pricing and presentation, the reason that that's so important, especially in this type of competitive market, is timing. And what do I mean by timing? Well, I can show you statistics ranging for years and years where a house generally is going to generate its highest and best price the quicker it goes under contract. So the longer it sits on the market, it's going to generate a lower price. That's pretty much a universal axiom, and it's so true. When buyers see a home that's been on the market, let's say for 45 days or more, they're going to think to themselves, was the house overpriced? Is there something wrong with the house? And even if they like the house, they're going to generally come in with an offer less than they would have had the house been a newer listing on the market. So one of the questions that I get from buyers, or sellers rather, is, well, timing, how long is it going to take to sell my house? Well, I can never guarantee that, but I can give them data on that neighborhood, and more importantly, I can give them my personal data. Typically, my personal data over the years has been that I sell houses quicker than the neighborhood average due to hopefully the things that I'm doing to benefit the seller. So one of the things that I tell the seller when this question is asked, if we don't generate a solid contract in the first 30 days from when we go to market, the likelihood is you're going to get less for your house than if we sell it in the first 30 days. So that's why it's so important to not overprice your house. I'll get a lot of sellers initially, well, I can always lower the price if it's not moving. And that's true, you certainly can. But again, to reiterate, when you employ that type of price reduction strategy, more often than not, you're going to get a lower price. So anyway, that's a little bit of information to provide to you guys. Hopefully you found that beneficial. That's all for today. Have a great, safe, and fun July 4th. And stay warm and stay dry if it rains a lot today. And we will see you a week from Tuesday. This is Marty Kaiser out.